If you're watching this video, you are looking to get an edge in strategic thinking, to beat out your competition, to gain and exercise new opportunities, and to overall win. Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you the only book recommended to me in grad school by a former CEO of a multi-million-dollar VC fund, where after he exited, he took a 99% pay cut to come share this with me. So, this is super valuable information. Let's get started and walk through this book. All right, people, here we are breaking down strategic thinking, providing you with the best book that I read in grad school about strategic thinking and strategy. The name of the book was called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt. I highly recommend it. I'll provide the link below. I even have it on my recommended reading list on my blog just because it is spectacular. So, starting with the definition that he breaks down, a good strategy is, in the end, a hypothesis about what will work. Let's break that down for a second. The whole idea, and I love, right, that I love that he says it's not a wild theory, because guess what? There's a literal consulting term called WAG, or wild ass guess, where you will make a wild ass guess about something that you have no idea about, or someone as a consultant will, versus here, if you are looking to strategically win, you are creating a hypothesis about what you think is going to work and what you think isn't going to work. And so from there, you then start creating a series of experiments. And I pulled out a clear example that he provides, which we'll get to in a later slide. But let's keep moving on in terms of how those experiments look. And the next key piece about strategic thinking and good strategy, which is, as we covered, you are creating experiments. You are a scientist. Treat yourself as such. That means that because you're looking to create something new, you will create a little logbook, write things down, and then you will record the observations that you find that no one else has. Because the next piece about good strategy is you are looking for things that other people have not realized yet, so you can take advantage of those opportunities. Let's keep going and I'll break it down. Plus, I love these animations. So, in this case, we've talked about it as a scientific hypothesis. You can see it there. An educated prediction, that's one of the key words, of how the world works. What I love about this, it may seem redundant, but the nuance here is so important, which is an educated prediction. The more you can read about something and have firsthand experience of it, the better the likelihood of you having a strategic advantage over someone. Simply because you understand it better than that person. Have you ever seen, let's say, for those of you who practice martial arts, the older instructor who doesn't seem like they're physically capable of doing everything, but you watch them learn a new move and it seems like it just gelled instantly? That's because they have an educated background of they've done millions of different moves before, so they can pick it up much faster. And then they can also predict much better than the newbie beginner white belt of whether or not something's going to work, simply because they practiced it more. The other key words in this part of the quote is how the world works. You know, I'm a big proponent of double loop learning versus single loop learning. I'm going to do a different video on that because it comes from systems science. But the basic idea is you are breaking down how the world works to update your mental models of what you have going on here. So the better the experiments, the more it'll actually let you know about how reality works, so you can build better things on top of that instead of waiting on and building off of bad information that is tucked away in your head because you haven't experimented with it. So let's keep going. Now, this is a little bit of a long quote, so I'll leave it up there. But the most important part of this quote, and I love how he says the ultimate worth of a strategy is determined by its success. That's the other piece to it. So I know last one I just said, the more educated you are on something, the more you're learning by experience, the higher the likelihood of success. That's exactly right. But a lot of the times you'll see someone bring an expert on and be like, in my own experience, or, oh, what I've gone through and tried. Again, that person may give their opinion and it says here, to a council of philosophers or a board of editors. That person, and this is why it's so important to bring the right mentor, the right advisor on, they should be giving you strategic things that have directly worked for them and they've replicated for someone else, because that's the ultimate worth of a strategy. I'm sharing this with you because I created my own leadership coaching program where I take young leaders and I will walk them through a strategy, and I've seen their success. I've seen them grow, and I've seen them get new opportunities just by talking about these topics and doing strategic experiments for their career. It's the same way for you and your strategy. You can implement that idea, but the chopping block of good strategy is success. It's not someone else's opinion on it. It's your success, which is important to note as we move on to the next one. I love this piece. Good strategy work is necessarily empirical and pragmatic. Again, big fancy words. The key piece to notice there is pragmatic. I'm all about pragmatic wisdom here. And it basically breaks down into if it's not practical and if it's not data driven. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have intuition. You do. And later on, I'll talk about intuition. It's the idea of you should be able to take a good strategy, which is breaking down the problem that's in front of you, having a good diagnosis, having a guiding policy, and then taking coherent action. And you should be able to apply it today. So let's say, for example, that you want to lose weight. Well, a good strategy is saying, you know what, I'm going to meal prep. But then you even break that down further and you're like, oh, well, actually, the problem with meal prep is that it's too hard for me to find good containers around the house. And then as a result, I don't want to do the meal prep because there's too much cognitive load. BJ Fogg talks about that as finding the trailing edge of behavior. So if you're breaking it down as a strategist, you break down, well, what didn't work there? What went wrong? And then let me break that down. I have data because I didn't do it. Because remember, we're evaluating strategy based on success. And then from there, you say, you know what? I'm going to do something different. Guiding policy. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to put the containers in one place. And then the coherent action that you're going to take is say, you know what? I'm going to put those containers right next to the fridge. So next time I need them, once I pull the meal out that I'm going to cook out of the fridge, I have the containers right next to me so I don't have to go around the house looking for them. That's just a very, very simple, practical example. And that's good strategy work. And you may be thinking, what's another example, Moose? Here's a great one. He breaks it down in good strategy, bad strategy, and I love it in terms of strategic thinking here, where he breaks down Howard Schultz and he interviewed him and he understands, okay, why is it that Howard Schultz, who wasn't in coffee before this, he was a retailer, right, figured out and built this incredible company that is Starbucks? Well, he starts off with Howard going to Italy and forming a strategic hypothesis after going to an espresso bar. And his hypothesis was this idea of going, you know what? This beautiful experience that I had in an Italian espresso bar can be recreated in America and people will embrace it. Notice this hypothesis it's a yes or a no. It's pretty binary, right? People are either going to love it or they're going to hate it. But then there's no real in between, and that makes it really easy to test it, to see, does it work? That's the question you're asking. And then what parts of it work? And that's very strategic because then you can frame the problem in a way where it gives you awesome momentum to go, hey, let me see if this works. Let me see if it doesn't work. If it does work, what parts work, what parts don't work? And then you start trimming away. 80-20 analysis, it kind of breaks down from there. So let's keep going. But it's important to look at Starbucks as a great example of this. Now, here's another key piece that I love as we go through a little bit of a lengthy quote, but I'll pull out the key important parts here. For you to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to know something that others don't, and or you have control of scarce and valuable resources. Scarce and valuable resources, just think of oil, right? Changing because of our dynamics with electric cars. But the most important thing there is something that others don't know. That it could just be knowledge in terms of execution. as something as simple as this, you are giving yourself a strategic advantage in strategic thinking and better problem solving just by listening to this video and reading these quotes to say, wow, you know what? Before I start something new, it might be a new website, it might be a new venture, it might be just a new relationship. Is there something that you know that you can bring value in a way that others don't know? And if you do, then all of a sudden there's a higher likelihood of your success. And that's the idea. It's kind of, that's why VCs or whenever you're pitching, hey, what is your secret sauce? If you're in interviews, that's why they ask you, what are your strengths? What they're really looking for is, will you be able to bring something to the table that we don't know already? And your job then is to take that, capture it in your mind, write it down for yourself so you can move from there. A great example that I read is you'll see a lot of NBA players now that have ice on their shoulders, on their knees. And before, you used to just wrap tape around ice bags that would drip and leak. There's a company, the name of the product's called Hyper Ice. And it's really cool because Hyper Ice was actually invested in by Kobe Bryant when he was still playing in the NBA. Now, the product has gone on to do millions of dollars in sales, but in the article that I read about for this example, Kobe was looking for a competitive advantage as an entrepreneur, right? In the space of basketball, he was willing to be the best and willing to do everything possible for that. He kept that knowledge for himself of Hyper Ice because he got in on it early before anyone else did. And then he used it for a competitive advantage to win. Now, what's funny is that allowed him to grow, that allowed him to perform better, and that allowed him to outcompete his competitors. That's a very tangible example of something just as simple as wrapping your shoulder in ice. And there's an innovation there that all of a sudden helped and allowed Kobe to perform at a level that was much higher than someone else because he knew something that others didn't know. Now let's keep going so you can kind of think through this. I love this quote. I'll give you a second to read it, and I'm going to highlight the facts of the delicacy in the situation. A lot of us have these beautiful strategic insights, strategic thinking throughout the day where you might say, why is this so slow? A great example of this is there's coffee shops in LA that take forever to get into. And there's this engineer who goes, you know what? A barista should be automated. And he makes a robotic arm to automate coffee because when you look at it, the process is the same. And it was because he was a robotic engineer. And he's just like, there's got to be a better way. That could be just that glimmer of there has to be a better way. You walk into a location and you're just like, man, this just isn't working for me. Why hasn't someone done this already? That could be the beginning of your proprietary information, the thing that you know that no one else knows. It could be a mood. It could be a feeling. Sometimes for me personally, I started this, vlogging and blogging and content creation about strategic thinking, innovation, new product development, because there just weren't enough people talking about the things that are really practical, really tangible, and can make a real impact. That's why I'm bringing it to you so you can build off of that too. Let's keep going. Again, I can't overemphasize this enough. Right? Having privileged information is one of the most important and valuable resources that you can have. Now, with that doesn't mean you don't share some of it. You will, right? But find proper legal advice, talk to IP attorneys, think about what you can trademark, what you can patent, what you can copyright, and then what are trade secrets. And that's important for you to understand. Like the information, you might have a process, you might have a recipe. We've all seen it where if you think of an old Italian family, right, grandma's pasta recipe, particularly her sauce recipe, has been passed down through generations and is just absolutely spectacular. That is a perfect example of valuable, privileged information. Coca-Cola is another perfect example of that. No one really knows what's in the formula. It's a trade secret. It's written down in a vault somewhere, and entrepreneurial folklore is it's locked in a vault in Atlanta. Whatever the case may be, it's because it's valuable, privileged information that they've built an entire multi-billion-dollar brand on. Look for that for you. And so, here's what I love about this. This process of learning through experimentation. because my Trojan horse for you is to be a great strategist. It goes back to that quote we were talking about of being a great scientist. Well, for you to be a great scientist, a lot of the times you're learning through scientific induction, which they say here, which is instead of top down, which is deduction, here's the final picture and we're deducting from there. Instead, we're inducting so it gets bigger as you go. In this case, it's those little pieces that starts adding up. In the Howard Schultz example here, Howard started this espresso bar in Seattle called Il Giorno, which I'm sure I got that wrong in Italian. Sorry about that. It might have been Il Giornale. It was one of the two. Either way, probably got it wrong in Italian. Moving on. Sorry for all of you out there who are Italian. But it was interesting to go, he started stripping away pieces of, he basically transplanted that espresso bar in Seattle. And then he started noticing people didn't like the Italian on the menu. People didn't like the opera music. They wanted to have to-go cups. They wanted more milk. And so before you knew it, he went through this process of scientific induction where he started adding the pieces that worked. And what was also interesting is that he was removing the pieces that didn't work. And that process of learning allowed him to build what we know today as Starbucks, which then goes on to the next piece. Sorry, duplicate, but I edited it out. We're just going to keep going. This important piece, and I love this, is being able to be less myopic or less short-sighted than others. We've all been in one of those situations where you know you're absolutely not right. And it's not the kind of right where you're like, oh, I'm right. You're like, no. I've trained in this. I've seen this before. I spent a lot of time trying to understand this. And so you've seen that pattern before, maybe thousands of times. And then what you do is you share that information going, hey, I know how this works out. I really want you to go a different route. Okay, not a problem, except the person doesn't listen. And so all of a sudden you're like, oh no, right? We should know better. But they didn't. And so that person was closed-minded. And I love this part of the quote right here that says, being less myopic than others or short-sighted, you win. And that's why I always recommend read, watch videos, learn, because if you're investing in yourself through reading and learning, you're seeing things that other people don't see. Because you can see things that other people don't see, there's a higher likelihood of you making a better strategic decision, being a better strategic thinker, and winning. And that's what it's about. So let's keep going, but hopefully you can see that's how you win this game. And this is also what I love. By its very definition, when you're doing strategic thinking, it's going to be hard because you're breaking down real problems. You are going piece by piece and saying, okay, you kind of tease them out into their separate components. It's like opening up the hood of a car and looking in on the engine. Unless you have a Tesla, then you're looking at the batteries. All right. But you look and you're like, whoa, you can deconstruct those components. And what's fun is I give a little example in a guide that I created to entrepreneurship about this, where I deconstructed the pieces that are really meaningful. Because for you to understand, let's say, the people that you need to meet with and the framework you need to have is a really big deal. So I'll link down to that so you can check it out, because it's an example of, hey, it took me years to go through and write that because I was pulling all the different pieces together to build a really solid strategy. But it's also allowed me to see things that other people haven't seen, and it allows me to build in a way which is really, really valuable. And that's what I want for you to be able to do. So moving on, I love this piece. He gives an example in the book of, he asks a room full of management executives to give a recommendation to TiVo. Book's a little dated. And at the time they were losing money. And the question he was asking them wasn't what was in the stack, because they all handed in their recommendations of what was your recommendation. It was, how did you reach your recommendation? And it was fun because so many of these executives that were well-seasoned, well-trained, the author of the book taught at UCLA, so clearly had competent executives in front of him, was missing the fact that many of them weren't doing something called metacognition. They weren't thinking about how they were thinking. They weren't thinking about how to approach the problem. That's why I did a previous video on the difference between a puzzle and a problem, right? I'll link to it as well so you can check it out. But it's this idea that how you approach something, the lens through which you look at it, can make or break how you solve it. And so that in this quote is just beautifully said, because it's your job to actually train your brain to think about something strategically, to say, hey, have a series of questions, write them down, that whenever you see a new opportunity, these are the questions that you're going to ask. From there, let's break this part down, which is for a strategy to have any bite. Keyword there, bite. Like, part of this strategy is going to help you succeed, to help you move forward. It's going to chart a direction based off of a diagnosis of a situation. I love that, because for you to diagnose something, that means there's a problem. Because, or it could be a puzzle, depending on what you're looking at, but you were trying to break that down, right? To say, okay, what's going on here? So let's say, for me, with some of the work that I'm doing, the problem that I saw is no one is giving really practical information in the space of creativity and innovation to a level that can really make a difference in your life, right? Giving you the high level concepts, but also practical, like, hey, you could do this tomorrow. And that's why I created a program to do that, to say, hey, try this in your life. Well, that piece is, okay, I saw the problem, I diagnosed it, not enough content out there. Okay, now my guiding policy, I'm going to create great content. Then guiding action, all right, here you go. I'm going to create video quotes where I'm going to pull out incredible quotes that I've read from incredible books, incredible academic researchers, to bring them that have worked, that are practical, that have been tried and true, but people aren't talking about it. And so that's why I'm bringing this to you. Moving on to the next one. Love this. How many of you have had that flash insight, or just that gut feeling where you're like, I know this thing could be different. I know it could be better, right? That initial insight about a challenging situation. It could be a friend in a relationship. It could be a business meeting that you're in that you're just like, that didn't feel right. Well, this sets the expectations for you, knowing that, you know what? It's never going to come to you in terms of a full-blown strategy. It was that kernel of an idea. Just go, I think I'm onto something. You follow that hunch, and then you move with it, because it's that hunch that takes you to the next step. So that's good for you to know, to go, the next time I have this hunch, that could be the beginning of a strategy. So you write it down, you record it on your phone, you make a little Loom video, and you run with it for a little bit to see where it goes, and you treat it just like a little experiment. Moving on to the next one, which is the end of the video. Hopefully that covers for you all of the key components of strategic thinking, meaning this book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, can change your life in terms of strategic thinking. For you to be a better strategic thinker, you are looking at things as tiny little experiments to problems that are somewhat difficult. They may be puzzles that are difficult. And it's okay that you are going to fail. It's expected. But out of each failure, you are looking for the things that work versus the things that don't work. And you keep doing more of the things that work. Because as you continue to do so over time, you will outperform other people around you to the left, to the right, simply because you stayed in there doing those experiments. And then all of a sudden you stumble upon something. What they don't know is you've been doing it for years. But that's okay, because you can then potentially have the next insight that turns into a Starbucks, which was a little kernel that you passed. A great example of this is Sarah Blakely, right? The whole idea of she wanted to wear white pants to go to a party, and she just cut the leggings out of her pantyhose, and then that turned into Spanx. It was that initial insight where she was trying to solve her own problem. Big fancy term for that is user-centered innovation. Another way we talk about it is scratching your own itch. But it's that she scratched her own itch, and before you knew it, right, over time, and she kept following it and kept following the strategic marketing and kept doing what worked and stripping away what didn't work, and now she's a self-made billionaire. And obviously there's a lot to it, but that's the idea of scientific induction. You're taking this little insight that is not full blown at all, and then slowly but surely it gets bigger, and then you climb and you climb and you climb, all because you were following this path of strategic thinking, of going, hey, this little nugget can turn into something. So leave a comment below in terms of which one was your favorite quote and why. And I'm looking forward to breaking this down further with you. Thanks for watching.